Yes, I will do that. James Nance is
Alan
absent.
Zeman, I'm sorry, James Nance is here.
James Nance is present.
I hope this isn't news to you, sir.
Alan Zeman is absent, which I thought I'd said. But and then we also have a vacancy on the committee, so there we are. So, but we do have 3 persons present, which constitutes a quorum. All right, so that brings us to open meetings, Public Information Act, Administrative Procedure Act training. Mr.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm Brad Bowman, General Counsel. We try to do this training for all of our boards about once a year. Just a kind of a refresher on the requirements of the Open Meetings Act and some of the other statutes that apply to your service as committee members. And I know you've all had this training, so I will try to be brief and just hit some highlights. And you have written materials there, and if you have any questions, please stop me as we go along, and we can talk about any of the issues, or if you have anything that you want to discuss. Otherwise, I'll just try to run through it pretty quickly here. The first item that we wanted to talk to you about is the Open Meetings Act. The purpose of the Open Meetings Act is to promote good government through open government. And the way it does that is by making meetings of governmental bodies open to the public. What that means is that if you have a quorum or majority of a board or committee, such as this committee, that is meeting to conduct business or discuss business, then that has to be noticed. The public has to be given advance notice of that meeting. It has to be open to the public. All of the items that you are discussing or acting on have to be in the notice so that the public is aware of what those items will be, what those items of business will be. That's a pretty obvious situation where the Open Meetings Act comes into play, but there are also less obvious situations that you need to be aware of, such as conference calls or emailing or text messages, things like that. If any of those kinds of communications involve a quorum of the committee members, that could be a meeting, if it's about committee business, that triggers the requirements of the Open Meetings Act, and it could be a violation, so you have to be careful of that. Hallway discussions are another issue. So just be aware, if you have any kind of discussions with other committee members outside of a posted meeting, be aware whether there's a quorum involved, and that you not have a quorum discussing committee business outside of a posted meeting. You also have a concept called the walking quorum. Even if you have less than a quorum of committee members that are discussing a particular issue, if say you have 2 members that talk about an issue of committee business, and then one of those members walks that issue, discusses that same issue with another committee member, even though you didn't have a quorum together all at the same time, that's known as a walking quorum, and that could also be considered a meeting that triggers the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. Another thing to be careful of course, there are criminal penalties in the Open Meetings Act, so that's part of the reason that we have to be careful about these things. The staff will try our best to publish the notices and organize these meetings in a way that complies with all of the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. So we have some best practices for you there. Definitely avoid that walking quorum situation. Try to avoid emailing other committee members outside of a posted meeting, things like that. I mentioned earlier that the notice of the meeting has to include all of the subjects that are going to be discussed in the meeting. We have to stick to those subjects that are on the posted notice, the posted agenda in the meeting. One exception to that is public comment. If any committee about any subject, they can do that. However, if it's not an item that's specifically on the agenda, the committee should not engage in a discussion with that person about that issue. If it's something that the committee wants to discuss, we could put that on an agenda for an upcoming meeting. And that'd be the way to handle that if that comes up. We have some resources for you that the Attorney General's office has put out there for agencies to use, their Open Meetings Handbook and some other resources for you to look at. There are training videos Also, a good resource is our office. If you have any questions, any of these issues come up, please call us, and our phone number is on there. We'll be happy to try to answer that question for you. Any questions about open meetings or anything like that?
No.
No, sir. Thank you.
I'm going to move on to the other subjects just very quickly. The Administrative Procedure Act is another statute that governs some of the activities that you may be involved in. In particular, it oversees rulemaking, agency rulemaking procedures. So and we haven't had a rule change, formal rule change in this program for a while, but if we do have a change to the rule or a new rule for your program, the Administrative Procedure Act sets out the procedure, the process that we have to follow to adopt any of those rule changes. And basically, we have to publish a notice in the Texas Register of what the rule changes are, a summary of those changes, and give the public an opportunity to comment on that. So the rule has to be published for at least 30 days to allow the public to comment. Any of those comments would be brought to the committee for your input and to decide on what kind of final recommendation you would make to our commission. Our commission actually adopts the rules based on your recommendation. And once that public comment period is over and we've responded to all the public comments, then our commission is authorized to adopt a final rule. So the APA kind of sets out all that process. There's also a provision for rule review. Every 4 years, we have to review all of the agency rules. We have a schedule for doing that. And when your program comes up for that review, we'll bring that to you and any public comments that we get as a result of that rule review. It's just kind of a chance to look at the rules as a whole and determine whether they're still necessary, whether any changes might be needed. And then also we have some resources for you on the APA and the rulemaking process. Lastly, the Public Information Act. This is a law that makes all information, records, documents, etc., that are in the possession of a government agency, generally speaking, open to the public. There are exceptions to that. There's information that may be confidential for some reason under the law. But as a general rule, all of the information that a government agency has is considered open to the public. For your purposes, this is not something you would see very often, but do want to make you aware that if you have any, say, email communications, even if you use a private personal email account or a personal device, computer, phone, etc., if you're using that device or account to conduct committee business, then that particular communication, email, text, what have you, would be considered public information. And if we get an open records request, we may have to ask you for any of those communications that you might have on a personal device or personal account. So just be aware of that the law does consider, even if it's in a personal account or on a personal device, and if it's related to committee business, it is considered public information. So,
does the agency have a retention policy for email, like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, a year, or anything like that?
we do. It's generally 1 year that we retain email. There are situations where email might need to be retained for longer if it's related to litigation, for example. And we have a means to store those for longer. But the general rule is a 1 year period.
Very good. So try not to destroy email in 1 year. Okay. Very good.
Any questions about any of that, or?
Nope. Thanks, John.
Thanks,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Bowman. Appreciate it. Brings us now to item D, which is the approval of the minutes from our August 11th meeting. I was not here, so I will abstain from the vote, but did anybody have any changes,
I move we
corrections?
approve the minutes. Is there?
Second?
Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please raise a hand.
All right.
Motion carried unanimously of those voting. All right. Item D, I'm sorry, item E is public comment. Do we have any public comment? Hearing none, that brings us to staff reports start with Executive Office. Mr. Ferry?
Good morning,
Morning.
Mr. Chairman. I am George Ferry, Director of the Compliance Division. I'll be sitting in for executive because our executive director is actually over the Capitol, sitting in on a hearing, which I'll touch on in a second here. Do have 3 items to address under recent developments and legislative update. First one's a personnel announcement. So if you recall, I announced at the last meeting that our longtime executive director, Mr. William Coons, was retiring August 31st, and that Brian Francis was appointed as our executive director. That left some vacancies in the executive leadership team, and we have hired 2 new folks to fill those positions. So I'm going to tell you who they are and a little bit about them. First, our Deputy Executive Director, who will be over Operations and Regulatory Services. Ms. Carla James comes to us from the Comptroller of Public Accounts, where she has served as the Appropriation and Control Supervisor since 2012. She has extensive experience in state budget and accounting policies and procedures related to appropriations and accounting functions, and I think will be a great addition to our team. Prior to working for the Comptroller, Carla served as Deputy Securities Commissioner and Director of Staff Services for the Texas State Securities Board, and was in the past Executive Director of the Texas Incentive and Productivity Commission, and served as a budget analyst with the Legislative Budget Board. So she'll be starting December 15th. Also starting on December 15th will be our new Chief of Staff for for Strategic Communications and Government Relations is the areas that he will be covering. Nick Voenis comes to us from the University of Texas at Austin. I won't make any comment about that school, hook him. He served as a Senior Associate Athletic Director from 2005 to 2016. Nick was the Chief Spokesperson for the department and sports programs. He managed and supervised the department's media relations, marketing, game day productions, web, photography, video, and graphic design staffs. And it's also been the primary department contact for UT Austin state and federal governmental affairs staffs on issues affecting Texas, the Big 12 athletics. So again, two very qualified and experienced folks who will be starting as part of our leadership team here at TDLR starting December 15th, a few days from now. The other item I wanted to talk about a little bit, some of you may have heard that in the last legislative session we were given 14 programs. One was the Driver Education and Safety Program, which we took over on December 1st of 2015. We also were sent, as part of Senate Bill 202, sent 13 smaller professional health professional licensing programs from the Department of State Health Services. The first 7 of those we brought on board October 1st and went live with those programs. So they are up and running. Things are going smoothly. It was described by most as a seamless transition. We do have 6 more that will be coming to us as a part of that overall project, and those will be coming to us November of 2017. So we're extremely busy implementing those programs and working on phase 2, the November 17th due date for those programs. Hired a lot of new staff to implement those programs, and it's been very successful. Which kind of leads me into the next item, which is both a recent update and a legislative update, recent development. There's a hearing, excuse me. Mr. Francis is at a Sunset Commission hearing today that, among other things, includes a recommendation from the Sunset staff to send 10 other health profession programs to us over the next few years. That today is just the hearing. There will not be a decision, but Brian is there to provide as a resource witness and to talk a little bit about TDLR's organization and our success over the years in implementing programs. So we're anxious. That is going on right now. So you may see some of us sticking an earphone in our ear or something like that, you know, just to listen in. Just kidding. That's the biggie. Obviously, we have the legislative session coming up starting in January, and the pre-filing of bills actually started in the middle of November and will continue on through March. So we're ramping up for that particular exercise, and we'll be very busy. With all the programs, we have 32 programs currently. Excuse me, and that doesn't include the 6 in phase 2. So we're a little busy around here, but something we've got a lot of experience of and have been very successful with in the past. So, but we will not forget the weather modification program, I promise you. So, so any questions? All right. Well, thank you all. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it, George. Brings us to item number 2 under staff reports, which is the Office of Innovation. Mr. Bomar.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm George Bomar, Weather Modification Program Specialist for TDLR. I wanted to report on the recommendation that the committee made at its last meeting that we issue license renewals for fiscal year 2017, which began on September 1. And the agency did issue the 7 license renewals to the organizations that are conducting rain enhancement operations in Texas, as well as 1 hail suppression permit, I'm sorry, hail suppression license to Belding Farms that's based in Fort Stockton. I thought I would include today a list of the total acreage involved in the rain enhancement target areas in Texas. And we've distributed a paper copy of a corrected list that has the total acreage for the newest of the rain enhancement projects, the one that's based in Stamford. And that brings the total acreage in Texas within target areas. Operational areas, of course, would amplify that considerably, but these figures are for target areas or areas of intended effect. And the total is 26,634,572 acres. And that works out to be nearly a 1/6 of the land area of Texas. And I thought it was interesting to note that some 4 years after the state grant program was first authorized by the Texas legislature in 1997, that our total acreage for rain enhancement had grown to over 51 million acres, which was nearly a third of the land area of Texas. And since 2003, when the grant program ended, the total acreage has declined, and that's only because there were some projects that were not able to be sustained using only local water district and county commission money. So we've gone from about a 1/6 of the land area of Texas down to, we've gone from a third of the land area of Texas down to a 1/6 of the land area. But these projects still extend from the Texas Panhandle down through the Permian Basin and Pecos River Valley across the Edwards Plateau into south central Texas, including San Antonio and points south. Are there any questions about that information that I've given to you?
No.
The project that's based in San Angelo continues to be the largest, with nearly 6.5 million acres, and that project is in its 21st year. In fact, has completed its 21st year. That's a nice segue into the next item on the agenda, the status of rain enhancement operations statewide. Essentially, cloud seeding operations have been suspended in most, if not all, of these areas. We're deep into the non-convective season. There are very limited opportunities for thunderstorms at this time of year. But all of these programs that are listed on the total acreage page did conduct cloud seeding operations for rain enhancement. One project also had a hail suppression component. That was the project that's based in San Angelo. And we expect to have another statistical assessment based upon weather radar from the National Weather Service done over the winter, with some results perhaps by the next time the committee meets, assessing the work that was done in 2016 and the estimated additional rainwater that resulted. I want to interject here before I talk about weather modification on the international stage. I wanted to inform you about the loss of a member of the weather modification community, a man by the name of Hans Allness, 55 years of age, who has worked in Texas in the past. As a matter of fact, he was our pilot during the TXARC program back in the mid-1990s. TXARC standing for the Texas Experiment in Augmenting Rain Through Cloud Seeding. It was a research program funded by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. Hans was the pilot of the Cheyenne that we used during those several summers of cloud seeding research. He was flying a Cessna 340 last Thursday in the vicinity of Fargo, North Dakota, when the plane crashed and he lost his life. I did want to just say a few things about him. His memorial service is being held today in Bowman, North Dakota. Hans was the consummate pro pilot, dedicated to the pursuit of good science and willing and eager to take us into some stomach-turning rides inside thunderstorms. But that's not to imply that he was carefree as the one steering our research aircraft. He had great skills in knowing where to go and where to turn away. I never feared for our safety. His passing at the age of 55 is a tremendous loss to the weather modification community. As I said, his body will be laid to rest in Bowman, North Dakota today. And our thoughts and prayers continue for his wife, Jane, their 2 children, Hans' mother, and others in his family and circle of friends.
Wow.
I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to meet him some years back when he was working in the Big Spring, San Angelo area, but he was truly a professional at what he did. He worked for the Weather Modification Incorporated company that's based in Fargo. He was the vice president of operations. He had worked on the North Dakota Weather Modification Research Project for 35 solid years without interruption. So he has contributed greatly to the development of cloud seeding technology as a means of enhancing rainfall and suppressing hail.
That's a shame, George. Was he doing weather modification business when he crashed, or?
No, my understanding was he was flying an aircraft that belonged to the company that had been worked on. Not really sure yet what caused the aircraft to come to Earth prematurely. There's an investigation going on. He was in the plane by himself, had been in the air for an hour or so, and was in the process of returning to Hector International Airport there in Fargo when it crashed a few miles short of the runway.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Sorry.
Thank you. I've also included an item here about the country of Vietnam is now investing in weather modification. And the effort that apparently is ongoing at this time of year is for the purpose of pumping seawater in order to, in some circumstances, enhance rain, and in other circumstances, suppress rain. And what I find really interesting about this particular project is the Vietnamese Ministry of Science and Technology, having reviewed the project and stating that it's feasible, has requested the government to fund the project, which will include buying vessels and aircraft to make rain, to deal with drought or prevent flooding. And that amount of money is $224 million. To me, that is a staggering amount of investment. In all the years that the federal government in our country has funded research, I dare say that total is a tenth of what apparently Vietnam is going to spend in order to explore this approach to, in some cases, augmenting rain over land in the country, and in other cases, to try to get storm systems to empty their rain load while at sea before they actually move inland. I don't have any particulars about the proposal or the operations plan. I know that the Vietnamese traditionally have not participated in any of our national or international forums. No technical papers have been published, so we'll have to kind of wait and see what happens and what they find, and then make an evaluation of its technical accuracy.
Very good.
But that's an amazing amount of money.
That is.
But they're bragging about that their made in Vietnam chemicals are cheaper than ours.
Yes, they do make that observation, domestically produced chemical compounds. And I have no further information about that. They will use it to spray over mountaintops in order to make rain. And as
Pipes-
you know, Mr.
Pipes fixed
Foster,
at the height of 5 kilometers?
by helicopters or balloons.
Wow.
It's gonna be interesting to read about once they do it.
Let's hope they share their research, right?
Yes. And the last item I have under staff reports is a paper revealing a survey that was done recently on the issue of chemtrails and the existence of a secret large-scale atmospheric spraying program. Recall at our last committee meeting, I gave you a summation of a literature search that I did to try to find as much information as possible about the nature of contrails that folks continue to observe and to report and construe as weather modification, either advertent or unintentional. And I do get queries from time to time. We are now dealing with a open records request for information about weather modification activities going on in Texas. And in many cases, the underlying motivation isn't identified, but it appears that there are folks who believe there is some surreptitious weather modification going on that we either don't know about or that we have looked the other way and have found a way for folks to do that without a license or permit. And we assure people that this agency administers the act. We follow the statute. We have our rules to ensure that no weather modification is attempted without going through the licensing and permitting process. But I wanted to add to that literature survey, that literature summation that I gave you at the last meeting. The results of this survey, it was a survey made of 77 scientists who were queried about the alleged secret large-scale atmospheric program, and the acronym for that is SLAP, S-L-A-P. And In the copy that I furnished you, there is a list of the folks who were included in this survey. Expert participants in the Contrail survey and a second survey of experts in atmospheric deposition. And as you can tell, they are from universities all over the country, including right here in Texas. And just wanted to summarize for you what that survey indicated. Of the 77 scientists that were queried about the existence of this spray seeding being done by the government or by a private interest without going through the licensing and permitting process. Of the 77 that were included in the survey, 76 say they have never encountered any evidence of a secret large-scale atmospheric program. The goal of the survey was to establish a source of objective science that can inform public disclosure about these allegations. And the survey states that chemtrails has gained a passionate following of people who link spraying chemicals to negative impacts. And they are aware that there is some cloud seeding going on in Texas, and they believe there is a lot more of atmospheric spraying that's being done that somehow has avoided state scrutiny. It's interesting that in 2000, the EPA, the FAA, NASA, and NOAA posted a fact sheet to assure the public that the government is not operating a large-scale atmospheric spraying program. And it's also pointed out that there have been no peer-reviewed studies in the scientific literature addressing claims about a SLAP. And I want to just conclude by saying, in offering the first peer-reviewed expert response on SLAP data, it is reasonable that ordinary citizens should want questions answered concerning health, climate change, and pollution. While we understand that many of the fears underlying SLAP theories may be legitimate, the evidence as evaluated here does not point to a secret atmospheric spraying program. So this is another item that will go into our toolbox to offer to people who come to us inquiring about chemical spraying of the atmosphere for a myriad of reasons. Are there any questions about any of the items that I've covered?
No, sir. Thanks, George.
It's a good list of experts.
Ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay. Brings us to item G. Is that, or you're complete with your
Yes, I'm
item
through
two?
with the staff
Okay.
reports. May I just say that the individual who had planned to be here to give a report on operations ongoing in San Angelo and perhaps elsewhere was not able to make it because of some inclement weather out of San Angelo this morning. But we do have Craig Funke here, who is an officer in the Texas Weather Modification Association, who can answer any questions about any of the activities that have been going on, particularly with reference to the project that's based in Pleasanton. I know that Craig plans to address the committee later under item H.
Sure. Anybody have any questions for Craig outside of that?
No.
Anything you want to tell us outside of that? Okay, very good. Then to move us then to item H, consideration possible recommendation on an application for renewal weather modification permit for the South Texas Weather Modification Association.
Again, Mr. Chairman, this is George Bomar, Program Specialist. The South Texas Weather Modification Association, which is based in Pleasanton and has been in operation since 1997, has a 4-year rain enhancement permit that's due to expire in March of 2017. And we have an application from the association for a renewal of that permit for another 4 years, beginning in March of 2017. The association has furnished a completed application, has submitted a payment of, for a permit fee, has provided proof of insurability, and has submitted an operations plan. The only missing item is the notice of intention, which we have reviewed here at TDLR and approved for publication. And Mr. Funky informed me this morning that that notice will begin publication middle of this month and will be published for 3 weeks, once a week for 3 consecutive weeks, ending in mid-January. And so, as the committee has often done in the past, can make a recommendation for renewal of a permit contingent upon the notice being published and any public comment resulting from that notice being processed by the department, any public hearings held before actual permit is issued. I do want to point out that there is one significant change in the operations plan that the association has submitted as a part of its application package. And I included in the file for committee members a copy of the current permit, because I want to point out that on page 3 of the current permit, number 13-1, actually beginning on page 2 at the bottom, there are suspension criteria. The applicant will identify conditions under which cloud seeding activities will be suspended or terminated or will not be launched. And these are criteria that have been in our permits for a number of years. I want to say that originally, over 20 years ago, when the state grant program came into existence and various projects were being built, that the projects hired a contractor from out of state, and it was customary in those operations plans submitted by the contractors to have suspension criteria that read very much like those that you see here in the permit. Per se, the statute does not require that a permit spell out certain suspension criteria. But as a result of a request that was made by a group of landowners in and around Jeff Davis County some years back, a concern about seeding steady-state thunderstorms that developed over the mountains, that a suspension criteria be tweaked and that it be included in the actual permit and not just confined to the operations plan. Keep in mind that a part of the permit is the operations plan. And so as a result of that request, the advisory committee back then recommended that the agency begin to spell out the suspension criteria in the actual permit. And so we've been doing that ever since. And for all rain enhancement projects, the criteria read the same unless and until there is a request and a recommendation that a certain criterion be altered. And we have that sort of request as a part of this permit application today. And I'd like to call upon Mr. Funky at this time to explain to you what that change is in the criteria.
Okay. Mr. Funky?
Good morning.
Morning.
Craig Funky with South Texas Weather Modification. The suspension criteria, this particular one is has evolved over the last several permits. the original one was where we would suspend operations if there was a severe storm warning issued on that particular storm. From there, I believe the next permit, we had changed that to where we would suspend operations after a severe storm warning if the radar scan at a certain level for 3 consecutive scans proved over a certain level DBZ. That was a big improvement over just having to cut off altogether, but it increased the workload on the meteorologist and still kicked us off some storms that were quite seedable and still safe enough for us to be seeding. So what we've done with this one is from the time the severe storm warning is issued on a storm, the clock starts running and we have 20 minutes that we can continue seeding while monitoring the development of that storm in its severe state. If it's going to continue to get worse, if the seeding effect that has taken place, or the seeding that has taken place has an effect to reduce the severity of that storm, typically it takes about 15 to 20 minutes for that result to be determined, that you can see that on radar. So this just gives us a buffer in there. Now, you got to look at this like a speed limit. You know, a posted speed limit is a maximum speed limit. That doesn't mean you have to drive 70 miles an hour. This does not mean we have to seed this storm for the additional 20 minutes. Many times the storms that go severe are so rough and so dangerous that we just pull off and leave them alone, and that's aircraft and pilot safety. But this just gives us a little more leeway, reduces the workload on the meteorologist to where once that severe storm warning comes out, all he's got to do is note the time, add 20 minutes to it. No matter what's happening, if that severe storm warning is still in effect, 20 minutes after that, then we pull off. And that's the maximum amount of time we can go. The only other difference in these, in this operations plan is we changed some of the wording. We removed, I believe, all the reference to the WSR 74C radars that we used to use. We used to keep the one in Pleasanton operational for a backup system in case the National Weather Service system ever went down. We have since sold that radar to another country, so all the wording for the old radar has been removed. But other than that, that's the only change to the permit or operations plan.
Craig, am I reading this correct that that change does not occur to Bear County? Or am I reading something wrong?
We will not seed anything because of the population density of Bear County, even though the Edwards Aquifer Authority contracts with South Texas Weather Modification to conduct seeding up there. Because of the population density, the flooding issues that that large metropolitan area has, we won't touch anything that's severe in that area, or fixing to move into that area. So we just stay away from that.
And in all of these flights, you've got a meteorologist and a pilot. You're watching everything carefully and.
Absolutely. That's part of the rule is you have to have a licensed meteorologist conducting the operation. And now with modern technology, we have GPSs in the plane that also display current weather. And when a severe storm warning or tornado warning or anything pops up, it pops up on your GPS, just like I imagine most of the ones in the vehicles now do that also. So yeah, the information is almost instantaneous.
You got any questions?
Nope.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Greg. Mr. Bomar, do you have any comments you would like to share on that change? Beyond what you've already shared with us.
Mr. Chairman, George Bomar again. The criterion that we're discussing is on the 5th page of the operations plan. And the only one that's impacted is the one pertaining to a severe thunderstorm warning, as Mr. Funky said. For as long as the state has been regulating the use of cloud seeding through licenses and permits, it's been incumbent upon the applicant to identify the criterion of the criteria under which it would function. The statute does give the agency and the advisory committee that serves it the authority to set any terms, requirements, or conditions that the agency and the committee would deem advisable. And so just as the committee previously has recommended that a certain criterion be altered to address a concern, the committee would likewise have the right to recommend that this change in the criteria be adopted when the new permit is issued, assuming that it is issued after all of the steps have been taken in the application process. And there is a rationale for having these criteria in a permit. In some cases, it may be a matter of the insurer insisting that these criteria be built in to ensure that a adverse weather situation not be aggravated, made worse. It can also be designed to assure the public that there will be a high degree of observation and decision-making employed before a seeding mission is launched or suspended or terminated. As I said, the notice has not yet been published, and the notice will not have any mention of the fact that one of the criteria has been asked to be modified. But the notice can, of course, evoke some questions and some comments from people, and we'll deal with those as they become available.
Do you have any recommendation one way or the other? Or do you?
Well, I think it's important to reiterate that the criterion to be changed is not a requirement. It is an opportunity that is available if, in the judgment of the licensed person, that a circumstance will not be worsened by continuing to seed even after a warning has been issued. And it was our experience that many of these targets had Weather Service offices from different locations serving them. And it's a subjective decision that a Weather Service meteorologist makes in one location versus in a different location as to when is the right moment to issue a warning. And we did have a number of experiences once the Doppler was employed around the state of Texas of warnings being issued so early during an event that the weather modification people could hardly get the aircraft off the ground before they had to return because a warning went up. But the Weather Service is being more judicious now in the timeliness with which it issues severe weather advisories. So my recommendation would be to allow the permit applicant to operate in the way that it has spelled out here in its operations plan.
Thank you. And since they have exempted the heavy populated county, and all that, I'm comfortable with it. You don't have any questions?
Nope. I move that we recommend adoption. Recommend approval.
Recommend approval, subject to publishing
Yes.
and public comment?
Yes.
And I second that.
All right. So there's a motion by Mr. Nance to recommend approval of the permit as provided from the applicant, subject to publishing a public comment in accordance with state law and any action needed from the commission or the department from public comment that might come from it.
Yes.
All right. All those in favor say, or raise a hand, I guess.
Okay.
All right. Motion unanimously carries. That's it for our action business. I assume, Mr. Bomar? Which
Yes, sir,
brings
that's
us then to item I, recommendations for agenda items for the next committee meeting. I don't have anything I'd like to add. I think always George does a great job of
Yes.
outlining what we need to do, but if anyone has anything, if not, then we'll move on to item J. Discussion, date, time, and location of the next committee meeting. I think the location works best for the department here, obviously. Unless you all want to travel to Pleasanton, San Angelo,
Done that before, but might not be a good time to do that this time.
especially in the legislative session time, right?
Well,
Okay.
and actually, as far as scheduling, we'll probably want to do it after the session, so maybe June, if that will work for y'all.
That work with their permit cycle and everything,
It should,
George?
yes.
Okay, that's-
We don't have any more permits coming up between now and then, though, do we?
No, we don't. We have a lull now, and of course, the licenses will need to be renewed in late summer.
Wow.
So a June meeting would be
June meeting will be good?
good for that.
So we could pick a date right now, or we could send you 3 possible dates after the meeting today.
That would be fine, if that's
Yep.
okay with the board?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
This time, 10 o'clock, okay?
10
Yes.
o'clock works.
Any preference
Nine's
on?
better, but that's all right. I know
Okay,
there's some
well.
people that have to travel for.
Um,
9's all right with me.
I'd
Well,
prefer
I
10,
take
if we can do 10, but 9's all right. I
No,
can
no,
make
that's
9.
fine. It just makes it easier.
You just want that shopping day or in earlier. don't you?
So, gentlemen, let me give you some possibilities here. June 8th, June 15th,
Or the 22nd.
or the 22nd. What day of the week is that?
Thursday.
Thursday. So it's Thursday,
All three
first
of
of all,
them.
work for y'all? 8th, 15th, and 22nd?
Yes.
Okay.
That's June the 22nd?
Yes, sir.
At this point, any of those will work for me. We may all be recovering from the session hangover on the 8th, but so maybe the 15th or
That's too
22nd is
far-
better, but that's up to
too
you.
far out for me anyway, so
I'll neither confirm nor deny
Never
that.
know.
Either one, I mean, I think we could work with any of those.
Why don't we
George,
take
is there
this-
any reason to, as far as timing on licenses or anything, to do it early or late in the month?
Later.
Okay.
Go for the 22nd then?
So 22nd, will that work for
Sure.
you? Okay. So,
And
for right now, we'll
as-
send out reminders early on.
And I think as
Give you
always,
later on.
as always, I don't think the board here, or committee has any issues if something should come up that requires the agency to move the date.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Just let us
Yeah,
know.
we-
But other
yeah,
than that,
we
we'll
have that
tentatively set it for the
capability.
22nd.
We may well have a new permit application for a program starting sometime during the spring that would require your attention
Okay.
before then, but we'll let you know if we do.
Yeah.
Very good.
Just,
All right. There being nothing else business-wise before the committee, then it is
do we adjourn?
move to adjourn.
Second?
Second. All those in favor? All right. Unanimously have moved to adjourn. It is 10:56 PM, and we are adjourned.